Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from the Frontier. I hope the week has gone well. They do speed by. I put up a link for an interview I did with Charles Ireland, who is our next guest at Mindspeak on the 22nd of February at the Intercontinental. He, of course, is the CEO and MD of East African Breweries. And prior to coming to Kenya was in Malaysia, so I think you'll have a good context from which she's going to speak, and I'm looking forward to that enormously. If you haven't had a look at my interview with MG Vasanji, please do. I really enjoyed that. My home thoughts, first of all, it was a pleasure catching up with Dodo and Ludo last night. They have this can-do spirit, which is really wonderful. On that note, I'll also jump to Turgenev, who I read many years ago, and I suppose it's the Russian Olympics, which was the catalyst for going back to St. Turgenev. Oh, youth, youth, you go your way heedless, uncaring, as if you owned all the treasures of the world. Even grief elates you, even sorrow sits well upon your brow. You are self-confident and insolent, and you say, I alone am alive, behold. Even while your own days fly past and vanish without trace and without number, and everything within you melts away like wax in the sun, like snow, and perhaps the whole secret of your enchantment lies not, indeed, in your power to do whatever you will, but in your power to think that there is nothing you will not do. It is this that you scatter to the winds, gifts which you could never have used to any other purpose. Each of us feels most deeply convinced that he has been too prodigal of his gifts, that he has a right to cry, oh, what could I not have done if only I had not wasted my time, which is a fact. And then I like this, what a magnificent body, how I should like to see it on the dissecting table. Fathers and sons. I'm going to put up a photograph of the elephants, photograph I took on the 1st of September last year, the Amboseli. My, look at the back of that last elephant. Big elephant. And another photograph of Nishith and Hannah riding along the seashore, the lake shore at Elementaita. Political reflections, the practice of sport is a human right. Every individual must have the possibility of practicing sport without discrimination of any kind, and in the Olympic spirit, which requires mutual understanding with a spirit of friendship, solidarity, and fair play. That's the Olympic Charter. And then Remnick in the New Yorker saying the theme of these games is simple. This is Putin's pop culture reassertion of Russia, a worldwide media-saturated insistence on its modern power and capacities, all done with a flash and a reach that no diplomatic summit could ever match. Indeed, he's right. It's a premier example of soft power. And then Global Research had an article saying that the Sochi Olympics are at a strategic location on the Black Sea at the crossroads of Russia's oil and gas pipelines. The forbidden question, both by the West as well as by the Russian government, in addressing the possibility of a terror attack is who is behind the terrorists. Like this photograph I saw on the Huffington Post of somebody snowboarding. China pumps up the volume against Japan, there's a headline in the Wall Street Journal. During a 2012 diplomatic feud, China's government allowed thousands of protesters to pelt Japan's embassy in Beijing with eggs and plastic water bottles. Now, as tensions are flaring again, China's diplomats are taking a more buttoned-down tack. Dressed in tailored suits and speaking fluent English, China's envoys are engaged in a global campaign to vilify Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. Beijing's traditionally camera-shy envoys from Russia to Ethiopia and the US are on a media blitz to label Mr. Abe a militarist and a threat to regional stability. One Chinese official compared Japan under Mr. Abe to Lord Voldemort, the arch-villain in the Harry Potter novels. The onslaught began after Abe deeply offended Beijing with his surprise visit to a controversial war shrine in December. And you've had this phenomenal response, and of course he was not too long ago here in Africa. My view is that he's proven very effective at throwing sand in China's eyes. And, if you listen to his language, he's quite subtle, sort of undermining the Chinese narrative. He does it on a consistent basis, and I can understand why they're so irritated with him. Currency markets, the euro is at 135.92, had its biggest advance in 2 weeks yesterday on the no change from Draghi. Dollar index 80.87, Japanese yen 101.99, Swiss franc 0.90006, the pound 163.24, the Australian dollar 0.8942, and it surged 2% on February 4th, which was its biggest gain since June. And that was after the Reserve Bank of Australia dropped its reference to the currency being too strong. India rupee 62.345, South Korean won 1076.40, poised for a 0.6% gain this week. Rial below 240 at 238.25, Egyptian pound 696.11, and the South African rand briefly dipped below 11, last trading when I checked at 11.03. The euro has strengthened 5.6% over the past year and is the third best performer amongst the currencies, developed market currencies tracked by Bloomberg. The dollar 4% gain over 12 months, the yen down 5.6%. Most of the 24 emerging market currencies tracked by Bloomberg strengthened this week after that very sharp sell-off seen at the beginning of it. 2% advance in the zloty, the forint, and Turkey's lira. Ukraine, however, have imposed limits on foreign currency purchases after its interventions failed to alleviate pressure on the hryvnia. I'll put up a 3-month chart of the dollar index. We're back below that 81.06 level, which I said I saw as key, and I remain. I think that is the key level. Euro dollar, of course, we had this strong bounce. Draghi, speaking at a press conference in Frankfurt, signaled officials will wait until next month before deciding whether to cut interest rates further, as money markets stabilize and the economy shows some signs of recovery. He does react in an ahead of the curve manner, and the fact he's not reacting now, I think, is what led to that bounce in the euro. Dollar yen 101.99. I'll put up a 3-month chart of that. Twitter's shares fell almost 25% on Thursday, wiping out about $9.8 billion in market value. The stock was sold at $26 in November, hit a low of $50 in early trading, hit a peak of 74.73 in late December. However, concerns are around growth. Facebook, of course, has 1.2 billion users. Twitter's on its way to 1 billion. However, everyone's focused in on very anemic user growth. Twitter, quarter on quarter, users were up just 3.8%, and I think that's caught some people off guard. 1,437 days ago, I went to a session, and it was called Exploring the State of the Now. In many respects, Twitter is really about that. Gold was last trading at 1262.10. I think it's pricey up here. It's rallied 1.4% this week, and we've had a strong rally this year. Crude oil, $97.64. It's near a top in my view, but short sellers might be able to slot a triple-digit short over the next few sessions. Chicago hog futures surged as much as 16% this year to $1.10 a pound, which is the highest since April 2011. Frontier nations account for 6 of the 7 biggest gains amongst global equity indices tracked by Bloomberg this year, led by a 17% jump in Dubai's general index. MSCI Frontier Market Index rose 21% in 2013, outpacing the MSCI Emerging Markets Index by 26 percentage points, the widest annual gap since 2005. Coming to Africa, South Sudan, escalation of violence is at an unprecedented scale, says the Médecins Sans Frontières. Say massive numbers have been affected. UN aid agencies calling for $1.27 billion to help 3.2 million people. I'll put up a photograph of a rocket being fired by government forces as it soars over a burning hut in Jonglei. Interesting article in the FT Beyond BRICS, China suffers Africa image problem. After a decade-long resource push into Africa, the Chinese government is still struggling with an image problem. The accusations come thick and fast. Chinese foremen overwork or abuse their laborers. Immigrants are guilty of poaching and illegal mining, and merchants are undercutting local traders as they flood markets with cheap goods. As economic and diplomatic ties between China and Africa go from strength to strength, something's still missing in the realm of cross-cultural relations. Those problems are also increasingly apparent in China as more Africans head east in search of their fortune. Numbers are scarce, but local media estimate that up to 200,000 African traders live in Guangzhou alone, a southern city which is so popular with migrants that some in southern China call it chocolate city. Talking about African student exchanges, but just talking about the friction that is seen in this relationship. And I said that China is clearly informed of the issue, and that is evidenced in the spend seen at CCTV, where a visit to the studio in Nairobi is a very worthwhile experience. They've made a huge spend there. China had a very clear run at Africa, in my opinion, and floated Africa's boat via returning the demand side of the equation for African commodities into equilibrium and extending the maturity of contract for those same commodities, and that unleashed a virtuous circle of capital availability increase. President Obama was evidently boxed in politically in his first term. He had to be seen to be an American president. Just imagine the domestic blowback if he had spent a lot of time touring Africa when the US was just emerging out of a brutal recession. Of course, he is now able to move from defense to offense. Prime Minister Shinzo Abe is also a fellow prone to enjoy throwing sand in the eye of the Chinese, and his recent visit did just that. Of course, post-Fukushima, it's a national security issue to source and secure African energy to power Japan Inc. My point is that Africa is a lot more crowded than it ever was, and China will surely begin to feel the hot breath of competition. Furthermore, when it comes to messaging Africa, stadia in a very embedded attitude and bias in favor of governments versus the governed might unravel, because in many respects China has neglected the people. The people are young, they're all connected, and China needs to engage them. President Obama is, and rather effectively, in my opinion. On that note, I'll put up a photograph of an interview I did with Penina Karibe at CCTV. In fact, that interview was about Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's visit to Africa, and one of my last selfies ever with the CCTV Africa Bureau Chief, Pang Zinua, who said to me when I took it, I thought only girls did it. I said they don't. And here's the photograph to prove it. Asked during an RTL radio interview whether France's 6-month UN mandate granted on December the 5th would have to be renewed, Le Drian said probably. He said the situation in Bangui has more or less stabilized. In the rest of the country, it is much more complicated. Qatar National Bank aims to be the largest lender in the Middle East and Africa by 2017. Currently the biggest bank in the Gulf region, it is looking for acquisition targets in Turkey, Morocco, and Sub-Saharan Africa. Chief CFO Ramzi Mari told Reuters in an interview at the bank's Doha headquarters. Africa private equity deals reached a 5-year high last year of $1.6 billion. The most in 5 years. Private equity funds focused on sub-Saharan Africa raised less money year on year, down 46% from 2012. But a lot of this money takes time to be deployed. So actually the money being put to work might be of a different magnitude to the money that was collected last year. East Africa accounted for just over a third of the 74 deals completed in 2013. The amount deployed to the region doubled to 769 million, saying that the region is an investment hotspot after gas discoveries in Mozambique and Tanzania and other hydrocarbon finds in Uganda and Kenya, talking about the $600 million investment led by Warburg Pincus and Delanex Energy, so anticipating a strong and active year in 2014 as well. South African all shares negative 2.67% this year. Dollar versus Rand, we're back just around the 11 level. I'll put up a 1 month chart, but I think there's a real chance we'll see 12 at some point this year. Egyptian pound solid at 696, and the black market rate is not that far off. The Egyptian stock market up 9.55% this year at a 44-month high. Really has had a strong performance since Morsi was ousted. Nigerian all share negative 1.35% so far this year. Ghana Stock Exchange, best performing stock market in Africa, even if you take the devaluation that we've seen this year into account. The stock market is up 12.72% at a record high. Ghana raised the benchmark interest rate yesterday to 18% to defend the currency and introduce some restrictions on converting into foreign exchange. The French Development Minister Pascal Canfin has called Niger's requests legitimate in the dispute between the country and the French industrial giant Areva. Put up a photograph of one of Areva's open uranium mines in Arlit, Niger. First Rand apparently was considering expansion in Kenya as demand for banking services has increased. They said, "We have a representative office in Kenya. We're doing an analysis to see if we want to be there," said the CEO. I liked this sentence from the BBC, once known for its billion-dollar notes and hyperinflation. Zimbabwe must be the only place in the world to have 8 currencies as legal tender, none of them its own. The central bank interestingly said that over Christmas there was a severe shortage of cash and a surge in counterfeit currency. A lot of the banks, for example, were short of money. There were queues of many of them. I'm going to put up a photograph of members of the Central African Armed Forces surrounding a gendarme suspected of being a former Seleka rebel on 5th of February. And another photograph, this photograph reads, "I am all the African chiefs who have sold their continent to the white man." Samuel Fosso's self-portrait as an African chief. You can tell me what you think of that. The FD, via a report by Maplecroft, which I've already referred to, is talking about how Africa's getting riskier, and saying that worldwide 21 countries saw an increase in their exposure to risks, of which 15 are African. Increasing risk of political violence, weakening governance. Nearly a third of sub-Saharan African countries have seen an increase in their levels of risk, as recorded by the UK-based analytics company. And do have a look at that, and I'll also put up a global risks exposure index map that I found, which is quite interesting. The bottom line is asymmetric threats remain potent, as just like Westgate was 136 days ago, and I think that's going to continue. Apparently the Kenya government have named 2 other mall terrorists, both Somali Ahmed Hassan Abu Bakr and Yahya Ahmed Osman. No details on the men were made available. I wrote a piece on the 21st of October 2013 called Africa Reflections on the State of the Now, and I was referencing an Ibrahim index that he put out and said that out of all the headlines, this was what caught my attention. The rule of safety, law and safety index, that's in-country, not cross-border conflict related, was the only index which has deteriorated. The World Economic Forum also made a similar finding, And I think this is an alarm bell, and I think speaks to a consequence of a failure to meet the rising expectations of African people. Our societies are more urbanized than ever before, now becoming more personally dangerous, and it appears to be a sub-Saharan African-wide phenomenon. I don't think it's an external challenge, but it's an internal fissure which you've got to keep a close eye on. I like this story about the risk of ignoring Africa when investing. For Charles Field Marsham, it's been a new dawn in Africa for a while. He thinks more Canadian investors should feel the same way. I've owned a stockbroker business in Kenya for 20 years now, says the Canadian entrepreneur and founder of Kestrel Capital Management, an investment bank specializing in sub-Saharan Africa. He says there are huge investment opportunities in areas such as infrastructure, consumer products, transportation, communications, financial services. And while there is risk in any investment, sub-Saharan Africa is less risky than one might think. I'm always amazed at how adventurous Canadians are in the natural resources sector, whether it's oil, gas, gold, precious metals, or agriculture. They'll invest all over the world, including Africa. But if you go down to Bay Street and ask investors to invest in an African bank, an African brewery, or an African telco, which may be 50% owned by a British PLC, has been operating for 20 years, and has paid dividends for 18 years, they'll say no, no, no. He says the doubters are wrong, 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 and I'd agree with him. And I wrote that piece, if you'll recall, about how Africa's future is not seen in the rearview mirror, and I think I was making that point exactly that he's making in that. The Economist has got an interesting article about manufacturing in Africa, saying it's an awakening giant, and although it's coming off a low base, saying those who cast doubt on Africa's rise often point to the continent's lack of manufacturing. Few countries, they argue, have escaped poverty without putting a lot of workers through factory gates. But however, the Economist is saying there's a quiet boom in manufacturing in Africa. It's already taking place. Farming services are still dominant. New industries are emerging in a lot of African countries. We're talking about H&M, Primark, General Electric, Medicas, New York-based chocolatier. Saying increasingly this is going to happen. I think it will, but in part because transport is so expensive. Imported goods makes them very expensive. So increasingly, I think there's a gap that local manufacturers or manufacturers on the continent will be better placed to fulfill. Key constraint is power, cost of it, but I think we'll see dramatic reductions in that over the next few years. M-Shwari's customer savings have hit over 24 billion shillings in just over 2 years since the launch of the mobile phone-based bank account, making it theoretically Kenya's 18th biggest bank based on client deposits. CBA said Thursday it receives 200 million shillings in deposits daily from over 6 million users. Bank has loaned out 7.8 billion to M-Shwari users, dispersing over 30,000 loans each day. So it's been a tremendous success. Safaricom, of course, rebounded 4.37% yesterday, but I think that was more on the reduction of Vodafone's fees for M-Pesa. And then there's a story about how an M-Pesa-linked solar firm, M-Copper, gets 1.7 billion shillings from CBA and Bill Gates. Bob said we're not just lighting homes, but also enabling children to do their homework at night, as well as providing convenient, unlimited mobile charging at home. The Nairobi All Shares plus 0.79% in 2014. Yesterday's move higher was driven by the move in Safaricom. NSE 20 is down 1.69% this year. It's been quite a roller coaster ride. Do recall that if you ever want to track the stock market in real time, because as Lefebvre said, tape is your telescope, just register at rich.co.ke, get a password and go to Rich Live. And during trading hours, you should be able to see level 1 prices. I therefore wish you a wonderful weekend and look forward to speaking to you on Monday.